Good afternoon, boys and girls. Happy Friday. So I had to come down to the school to get a couple of things today before the weekend and decided that I would read to you from the classroom again. It's definitely different, but classroom hasn't changed. It's just very empty and very quiet. So I'm going to pick up where we left off with Sink or Swim. And our last chapter was chapter 19. And they were continuing up to New York with the convoy that they were protecting. And those other U-boats had been following them after they sank the first one. Then they attacked. They were able to dodge the first two torpedoes, but not the third. And they got hit. And Big Carrot, the chief motor machinist mate, he didn't make it. Colton was a little worried at first that it was Woody, but it wasn't. And so the realities of war are sinking in for Colton right now, and he's really wanting to be home with his family. So where we last left Colton, he was crying himself to sleep in his bunk. By the time we pulled into New York Harbor, I was back at my duty station on regular watch, but there were no more encounters with the wolf pack. No sightings, no nothing. Our PC was able to limp along, keeping pace with the lumbering ships in the convoy, but because of the damage to the hull, we weren't in any shape to chase U-boats. We could at least pretend, so that was what we did. There was no way to transport the 3 men who'd been killed, Big Carrot, Fulton, and a seaman named Cecil, so Lieutenant Tally ordered them to be buried at sea. I was still too weak from my head wound, so I didn't have to assist, but I watched as the other guys placed the bodies in long canvas sacks with weights at their feet and tied tight at the top. They were laid on planks, and the planks carried to the side of the ship. Lieutenant Tally said a prayer for each man, and then a couple of sailors who volunteered, Straub was one of them, tipped the planks up so that the bodies slid off and into the ocean and disappeared. It was a scene that stayed with me for days, for the whole rest of the trip. Those canvas bags in the shape of the dead men's bodies. The way they went into the water feet first, as if they were standing at attention, which I guess they would be once the weights carried them down to the bottom. It was hard to feel anything except sad. Woody seemed to be the same as me whenever I saw him, which wasn't often since they were down 2 men in the engine room and everybody had to work extra watches. We would sit quietly together in the mess, drinking coffee and eating stuff from cans, if either of us had an appetite. It was strange to see him like that. It was strange for both of us to feel like we were suddenly a lot older than we'd just been the week before. And a whole lot older than we'd been just 3 months earlier, riding that bus to Illinois for basic training. Neither one of us had much stomach for going into the city for shore leave either, even though Straub tried his best to cheer us up and get us to go with him. "We can catch a baseball game," he said. "Eat hot dogs, all kinds of stuff. It's New York City." Finally, we gave in and went with him, and surprised ourselves by having a good time at the polo grounds. I'd never been to a real professional baseball game before. Afterward, I couldn't even remember who was playing, besides the Giants, of course. I was a Washington Senators fan since they were the closest team to Ocracoke, but it was just from reading about them in the paper, which always came out a week after the games. There was something kind of nice about being in that big crowd of people yelling and clapping and whistling, and cursing when something bad happened, and drinking and eating and not caring about a thing in the world except a baseball game. I saw Woody smiling at one point, probably for the first time in a week, and laughing at something Straub said. I got so tired after the 7th inning stretch that the guys told me I fell asleep in my seat and missed the rest of the game, but I didn't really care. Turned out to be the best hour of sleep I'd had in weeks. For the rest of the summer, that was our life, escorting convoys up and down the East Coast, sometimes back to Key West, but usually farther to New Orleans or even Texas. The New Orleans and Texas runs were all about protecting oil tankers from U-boats in the Gulf of Mexico, and made us especially nervous because if one of them got hit by a torpedo, there was an enormous explosion, the whole ship erupting into a giant fireball, even the ocean around the ship on fire. There usually weren't any survivors, and the ones that did survive didn't survive for long. They'd be choking on oil when we fished them out of the ocean, coughing up black gunk, not able to speak, and after a while, a short while, not able to breathe. We lost 3 tankers over the next 3 months, but it seemed like every trip, every convoy, we encountered fewer and fewer U-boats. Never as many as we did on that first convoy. We didn't sink anymore, but we chased plenty of them off. Chief said it looked like they were staying farther and farther away, only venturing in close enough to fire their torpedoes at night, and usually when there was some moonlight. That wasn't often. By late September, we had 2 successive runs without seeing a single U-boat. Hardly seems like they need us anymore, Straub said as we neared New York Harbor at the end of that second run. I guess better safe than sorry, I said. Sure does seem like maybe we did it, though. Chased them off of the East Coast. Gotta give some credit to the spotter planes, Straub said, which was true. And the blackout, I added, which was also true. All up and down the coast, from small towns to big cities, people were putting out lights or covering up windows at night like we'd done on Ocracoke, so the U-boats didn't see the cargo ship's silhouettes against the shoreline, so no more easy targets. You think they'll pull us off this duty and put us to use somewhere else? Straub asked. There were a couple of other guys in the mess with us, but they just shrugged. We'd been working nonstop for months, with only a few days of liberty after that long weekend in New York when we went to the baseball game while the ship was repaired. Everybody was dog-tired. I heard they're moving closer to sending off that invasion force, and they're going to need ships to transport our troops over to, well, wherever we end up attacking, I said. France, I guess, or Belgium, or Italy. The Army, Navy, and Marines were fighting the Japanese all over the Pacific, but other than continuing to supply the Soviets and the British with food and weapons, we still hadn't sent troops to Europe to fight the Nazis and the Axis power. Everybody kept saying it was about to happen, but nobody seemed to know exactly when or where. I don't know, Straub said. They'll need transport ships for the invasion, and they'll have battleships and destroyers and aircraft carriers. What would they need a bunch of little bathtubs like ours for? One of the guys sitting there with us started quacking. The other guys joined in. I had to laugh. Yeah, Donald Duck Navy. That's still us. I wasn't ready to give up on the idea that we might have a role to play in the invasion force, though. They're going to need us PCs, I said. Maybe for reconnaissance, or maybe as command ships. Definitely to rescue survivors when any of those troop transports get torpedoed. You're dreaming, Danny, one of the quacking guys said. Once we're done running off the U-boats, they'll probably mothball our entire fleet of PCs and send us all to typing school. Chief walked into the mess just then and must have heard our conversation because he weighed in on it right away. They've gone north, he said. Who has, Chief? Straub asked. The U-boats, Chief said. Or haven't you noticed they're not around anymore? Well, sure we have, Straub said. So what now? So we go north too, Chief said. Orders just came in. Wolf packs are all over the North Passage now that they're not down here anymore. The last convoy across reported 80 U-boat attacks, lost a dozen ships. So they need us up there. We'll be escorting convoys over to England, maybe to the USSR, out of Newfoundland. We just looked at him for a minute. I guess none of us were too good with geography. It's in Canada, Chief said, shaking his head. You boys will get to see Iceland and Greenland. We'll pass them on the way over, assuming we make it that far. Won't have air support for most of the passage. I've never been out of America before, one of the quacking guys said. Wonder what that'll be like. Chief snorted. Just like here, only different. But don't worry, you'll be too busy fighting those bad ocean storms they got up there to notice, not to mention all those wolf packs. And did I mention how cold it's going to get? Ice and snow like you wouldn't believe. He chuckled. Other than that, though, a picnic. 2 weeks later, everything that Chief had told us was going to happen happened. We pulled out of Newfoundland and as one of a dozen escort ships, 6 PCs, a couple of destroyers, and 4 British corvette warships, which were like their version of our patrol crafts. Our job was to protect 100 ships riding low across the North Atlantic with everything you could think of for the war effort in England: meat, cereals, lubricating oils, machinery, wood, paper, chemicals, iron ore, minerals, cement, guns, tanks, even planes. Lieutenant Talley addressed us from the bridge as the massive convoy steamed out of port. You men have heard the rumors, and they're all true. The German U-boats have left the shipping lanes along the east coast, and you were an important part of chasing them away. But now they're swarming all over the North Atlantic route, and it's our job to see that they don't sink a single one of the ships in this convoy. England's ability to continue to hold out against the Nazis until we can get our American troops over there to bail them out is riding on this mission. From what I understand, that is still some months away, so it's up to us. It's up to you to make sure what's on these cargo ships makes it across safely to the people who desperately need it to survive. He paused, and I was struck by how much older Lieutenant Talley seemed, just like the rest of us, compared to the first time I saw him on our voyage out of Lake Huron for the shakedown cruise. Nobody would joke about him being a college boy now. In just these past several months, he'd turned into as hard an officer as any of them. The way I see it, he continued, and the way you should see it, is that not only are we responsible for getting these supplies over to England to save the people there, we're also responsible for getting these supplies over to England to help save the world from Nazis. Hope you all have a great weekend, and I'll pick up where we left off on Monday. Bye.